This is the Retirement Solution Podcast with financial advisor John Hicks, founder of J. Hagan Capital.
Glad to have you here with us on the Retirement Solution with financial advisor John Hicks, working to help you better understand this second phase of your financial life, how to take all of that hard-earned money that you've worked so hard to earn and save, and now put it into a plan that's going to generate the income you need for your retirement years. The paychecks are stopping. It's time to start planning for those income streams to rise up to meet you and your goals. So that's what John and his team at J. Hagan Capital can help you do. RetirementSolutionRadio.com is where you can go to start the conversation. We also have links posted in the show notes, or again, find us anytime, RetirementSolutionRadio.com. Something that we have had many conversations about is the unfortunately hard lesson that you yourself lived through in the idea of the work that you do as a financial advisor and retirement planner, from personal experience dealing with the passing of your dad and what your mom had to go through from an extreme financial pain point of because there wasn't a proper plan in place for long-term care and his estate and his legacy planning. And you had, now that's a critical part to every plan that you work on in your office.
Anyone that's ever gone through that, it's just a very eye-opening experience. Yeah. And it's one of the things that, for, the first decade of my career, we didn't do long-term care planning. I don't really like long-term care insurance at all. As far as estate planning, that's what lawyers were for. Heck, my dad was a lawyer and a small-town judge. So I just assumed that he kind of had that stuff in gear.
Right.
And lo and behold, to come to find out, later in time, that wasn't the case at all. So, it's one of those things that, once you're exposed to kind of how this works and once you kind of see the heartache and hassle it can cause by simply just not looking to find the solutions and the answers before it happens.
Right.
It's kind of one of those things that if there's anything to not procrastinate about, it's those things that we don't feel like we're right at the doorstep of, right?
Yeah.
People think, oh, well, John, it's so morbid to talk about when myself or my spouse would be incapacitated or one of us is gone. I'm like, I know, but if it seems like it's so far away because you guys are, healthy now and you're in your mid 60s, why would this not be a great time to discuss it so you can truly have time to reflect on, is it the right thing to do, as opposed to we get to our late 70s and one of us has already been impaired or we don't have the ability. So, it's one of those things where it's part of our 5-step process, our 5 pillars that we accomplish with every one of our clients, because we want to be certain that we know that most of us do not want to start this discussion. Well, blame us. If you've got a spouse, you're worried that they're not going to like this conversation, blame us for it. Because the thing of it is, I know not only are we going to be better off for doing it, but then we really are assured that if something does happen to any of us, right? Same thing with my wife. If something happens to one of us, we've already had the conversation and the other person can worry about coping with the situation, not worrying about a whole bunch of financial questions or decisions they have to make.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why we always want to go through it. And then, there's a lot of really good information out there. Attorneys provide a lot of it, but sometimes it's very confusing. We just want to make sure that whatever we're doing makes sense for that client for their specific needs.
The idea of long-term care insurance, you brought that up. It's important for people to know that there is, items of the past, things of the past that weren't that great. There are so many more options now, which is why it's so important to be having conversations with a fiduciary like yourself so that we can be exposed to all the different options, because it's not just a one and done kind of thing. It's about building out this plan to be customized to your goals and what you need, because when it comes to things that affect me that I have to worry about genetically, that's different than what you have to worry about yourself for your family and your own health. So case in point, the idea of dementia, for example, that's something that runs in my husband's family. That's something that we need to consider for his plan in our later years. And it's difficult enough, just the diagnosis of it. But there are the legal considerations that must be just that, considered. Thinking about former Tonight Show host Jay Leno, it's recently come out about how his beloved wife that he's been married to for decades, Mavis, is now dealing with it, and he has been granted a conservatorship because of her condition. Both of them, they're in their 70s. And NBC News correspondent Vicki Nguyen was talking about families in similar circumstances, how they can prepare with proper estate planning. Here's what she said.
It's a legal process. You have to file a petition with the courts, and it's cumbersome. And so experts we talk to say you really want to consider estate planning. You don't want to wait until you've been incapacitated because of old age or illness. No one wants to have this conversation, but we have to think life is fragile. It doesn't take a dementia diagnosis for things to be upended, right? So if you have this conversation ahead of time, you're saving your loved ones a lot of heartache during what would be a tough time anyway, and potentially fighting with the family. Otherwise, it's all left up to the courts if you don't prepare, right? It goes through the laws in your state, and the courts decide who makes these decisions for you.
Gosh, she just reiterated all the points you were making, John. But that last point about the courts now being the ones to decide, worst case scenario that we definitely want to avoid.
If you think, and even though my dad sat on the bench, for a period of time, when you think that someone that you don't know is going to be making decisions about your fate, what you can and can't do with some assets, when, for how long, to what extent, that is really a terrible situation,
and
right?
should be motivation enough, that fact, motivation enough to let's go ahead and take care of this.
Completely avoidable. That's the craziest thing, right? It is 100% completely avoidable as long as you are proactive in just having the discussion, right? Okay. One of the reasons why I said I really didn't and really have never liked long-term care insurance is when I first started off in the industry, I just could not believe how many wonderful, quote unquote, little old ladies I met, and they had bought long-term care insurance at some part of their life. Mm-hmm. And they were only paying, let's say, $1,000 a year or $1,800 a year. And by the time that they came to me, they're like, John, hey, what can I do about this? I just turned 75, and now they say that they're going to increase my bill. It had gone from $1,000 a year, $2,000 a year to like $7,000 a year. And now it's like $15,000 a year to maintain this long-term care policy. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what on earth is that? And and I just thought, man, what a ripoff. That is the biggest ripoff ever, especially if they never used it. Now, if they ever had to use it, it may be one of the greatest things they ever had. But I can't remember the statistic back in the day. I think I saw 49% or 48%, and this is back in the day, 48% of these things that people paid on, they never used. And the money was just gone. Wow. So that's why I never liked it. Yeah. There are so many evolved things that have happened in that space where you don't have to just pay for something you never use. But the point is that long-term care is only one portion of the estate plan. Yeah. Only one portion. What happened to my father is that he had had a stroke before he retired. So he hadn't shut down his law practices. He still had employees on staff. And my mother was kind of blindsided. She did not realize that he did not really have a proper succession plan because he didn't have any junior law partners. He hadn't partnered with anyone else because, frankly, at the age of 68, he didn't think he was going to have a stroke. And when he didn't pass away, but he was impaired to the point to where he could no longer continue to function as an attorney. Mm-hmm. So they found out that he had to basically wind down 2 different law practices in 2 different counties in order to make things work. And when they went through the books, it wasn't all that great. And then on top of that, because my mother just could not handle the idea of him being in a facility, she had to pay for people because she couldn't handle him all by himself. He couldn't, bathe himself. He couldn't really dress himself. He couldn't really do some of these things, go up and down the stairs. They had to spend over $400,000 of his IRA money in order to pay for in-home care for him to have that. Until he was able to be awarded, because he was a veteran, he was in the Army, until he was able to get the paperwork approved for him to get some help. Okay. So, but they still bled through all of that money, and then on top of that, that's the money that he had put away for both of them for retirement. So when you kind of look at it, it's like, oh my gosh, the fact that my dad did not have a financial power of attorney, mm-hmm. which my brother is in charge of the PhD tract of chemical engineering at Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. He's more than capable of handling these types of things if I wasn't in finance. But neither one of us were named as a financial power of attorney. So my mother, since she didn't have that, had to make all these decisions on the spot, and no one could really help her. And he didn't have a healthcare directive or anything like that either. So it was just really kind of a terrible time. So not only was she dealing with the emotional aspect of, her life partner being impaired to the point to where he couldn't function. And after the stroke, he had another stroke, and then that caused basically Parkinson's. Stroke-induced Parkinson's is what they called it. So he was not always lucid. She didn't know if the decisions that he was making were of sound mind and judgment or not. Right. So anything that he was saying, you kind of had to ask him several times over the course of several days. and try to get a gauge of when was he most lucid.
Got it.
Guys, that's no way to go through life. So we need to make sure that we have the proper planning in place. And so when we're going through our 5 pillars of our clients, number 1 is make sure we understand how much of our assets are protected so that it can produce an income. So those are the first 2, because if we don't have protection, then we can't create income, and income is what we have to stay retired. The third phase is tax strategy. We want to understand how can we hold on to as much money as we can and away from the government. So that's number 3. The fourth one is wealth transfer. So we don't call it estate planning, because estate planning implies we're all dead and it's going to go to kids.
Yeah.
Wealth transfer, the very first time we transfer assets, if we're a couple, is between a married filing jointly couple to one surviving spouse. That's very different. It requires different titling. It means that we need to make sure that we have proper things in place for medical and financial power of attorney and health directives. It also implies that we need to make sure we're titling things correctly, so that if we know there's an age difference between a couple, we want to title things completely differently so that it doesn't have a spin down provision if we want to look at look backs for trust obligations or Medicaid type planning or things like that. It all matters.
Yeah.
And it's very simplistic. Most people know what they want to do. We just need to put it in paper and make it apply, right?
Got it.
So that wealth transfer then leads to healthcare directives. And even though I don't love long-term care insurance, we at least want to look at the portfolio and find what asset should we earmark to be used for long-term care or things that like that should they happen. It doesn't mean we get the insurance. We just want to know what's going to be tax efficient so that we can utilize that and it doesn't blow all the assets for the survivor. But that is one of our 4, that's our 4th step of our 5-step plan. By doing that correctly, we can solve all of the heartache and hassle so that when we do have this, if this does happen to us, we can focus on making sure that the surviving spouse is going to be okay, and not have to worry about all of these decisions when it's really tough to make them.
Thinking in advance when it comes to our legacy planning, our healthcare planning, our estate planning. I mean, the question is, when should you start doing it? The sooner the better is what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely.
It's just about
yes.
just checking some boxes. Some people might be intimidated by it, thinking, like you said, it's a morbid conversation. But it's just like buying insurance when you have a young family. You're planning for the worst, but hoping for the best. Just get it done, just put it away, and don't worry about it.
And in our situation, it is the 4th element of when we're just planning for retirement. So we automatically force that conversation so that we know, even if we're not making a trust today, we know when and if we should and what that would look like. And because if it doesn't require the cost for the client, there is no way we would advise it. We just want to make sure we know, should we just title things differently to put them in the right position.
Got it. Getting to work, as we were saying, the sooner the better. Just get it taken care of, and then you know that it's just that. It's taken care of. John and his team are here to help you ensure that you've got this full plan in place to cover all these various aspects for your retirement years. Visit us at retirementsolutionradio.com to get that conversation started. You can also click on the links we've got posted in the show notes, or again, find us at retirementsolutionradio.com.
Thanks for listening to the Retirement Solution Podcast with John Hicks. Begin the conversation about your savings plan with John and the team at J. Hagan Capital by visiting retirementsolutionradio.com. Be sure to listen to John's radio show, The Retirement Solution, Saturdays at 8 a.m. and Sundays at 9 a.m. on News Radio 840 WHAS.
J. Hagan Capital Inc. is not licensed in all 50 states. To find out if J. Hagan Capital Inc. is licensed in your state, please call 502-690-5635. J. Hagan Capital Inc. is not affiliated with nor endorsed by the Social Security Administration or any other government agency. It does not provide legal or tax advice. Annuity guarantees rely solely on the financial strength and claims paying ability of the issuing insurance company. By contacting us, you may be provided with information about insurance and annuity products offered through J. Hagan Capital. National license number 1882794.